My name is William Corless, and this is the Workplace Podcast. Brought to you in association with Yellowwood, providers of executive coaching, corporate training and facilitation. Your external learning and development partner. Each week we focus on a different aspect of the workplace. We hear from guest speakers who will be subject matter experts, who I believe are incredibly talented at what they do. These experts will give you a different perspective and insight to work life, with the aim of empowering you to take a different path to success in all aspects of work life. These perspectives will include career and personal success, leadership, high-performance teams, and creating a better work-life culture in your organisation. Yellowwood. Take a different path to success with your career, team, and organisation. Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Our topic today is why menopause in the workplace matters. Our guest today is Loretta Dignam. She is the CEO and founder of the Menopause Hub, Ireland's first dedicated menopause clinic, offering a variety of services, including specialist menopause doctors, psychologists, physiotherapists, and acupuncturists. Loretta set up the Menopause Hub to smash the taboo that surrounds menopause. She wants to meet the unmet needs of women who are approaching or going through menopause, who want to optimize their health and vitality and to get back to living the life they love. Women are needlessly suffering in silence, and they no longer have to. Loretta, very welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me. My pleasure.
It's great to have you because I'm very interested about this topic. It's particular of interest to me. We were talking before the podcast started where my curiosity came from. And I suppose it came from coaching conversations. I'm an advocate for he for she campaign. As you were saying, that taboo needs to be smashed. I don't think it's a topic openly spoken about. And this is what the Workplace Podcast is all about, is about shining a light on topics that we normally don't talk about. Now, I have a limited knowledge and experience in this area, and I'm sure at least 50% of our listeners have. And where my limited experience comes from is a witness of my own mother go through menopause in the early 90s, and I was getting sent to the chemist with a note, and I never looked inside that package that I probably knew contained royal jelly or whatever the big thing was in the early 90s. And even discussing amongst friends or peers, or being on flights with I suppose, female mentors of mine, I was kind of curious, are you okay? What's going on? So that for me was a bit, have some enlightenment. And what I'd like to do is give you the opportunity to enlighten us. Why does menopause matter in the workplace?
Well, thank you very much, William, for broaching this conversation. Very brave, very honest, and hopefully your listeners will benefit too. Just to say that 50% of the population will go through menopause. So not every woman will be pregnant, but every woman will go through menopause. So it impacts 50% and probably has a knock-on impact on the other 50% at some point in our lives. And by 2030, there will be 1.1 billion women globally in menopause, with 47 million coming through annually. And in the Western world, for sure anyway, the 45 plus age group is actually the fastest growing cohort. The females is the fastest growing cohort. And therefore, we need to be giving support to our women. And I suppose one of the things in Ireland, if you take the numbers, it's 570,000 roughly are in this age group. About 350,000 of those are in paid employment. So it's a sizable cohort. And the other thing to say is that you said, 50% don't know much about menopause. Well, guess what? The other 50%, the women, don't know much either. And I'm not being facetious here. I did research last year, and 80% of women are unprepared for menopause. So I did this among about 1,250 Irish women. Or women in Ireland, I should say. And 80% are unprepared for menopause. And 66% know little or nothing about menopause. And I can concur with that because I've worked in the corporate sector for many, many years, worked for some major multinationals, fantastic businesses internationally and so on. I would consider myself to be reasonably well educated, reasonably intelligent. And I have to tell you, I had no idea. a month before my 50th birthday, I had my last period, although I didn't know it was my last period until 12 months later. And the second thing that happened within a few weeks was that I started to get hot flushes. So the only two things I knew about menopause were no periods and hot flushes. So then, Detective Loretta Dignam knew she was menopausal. And what I can say, though, is that, to be honest with you, I was unprepared. I actually thought it happened to women who are much older than me. So that took me by surprise. So I was unprepared. And in terms of knew little or nothing, I mean, those two facts are very little or nothing, to be quite honest, because not every woman gets hot flushes. And perimenopause, which is the phase leading up to menopause, is the time when other symptoms can start to happen. And because I'd never heard the word perimenopause, I missed out on all the signals that I was going into menopause in my 40s. And I had a myriad of different things that were kind of going wrong. And I went off and got those checked out by, like an MRI scan of my brain, because I had such bad headaches. I went and had to the eye and ear 3 times, to the rainy department with dry eye. I used to feel dizzy. I used to feel exhausted. I had UTIs. I mean, I could keep going on with the list of things. But the reality of it is that I was unaware and unprepared. So that all passed me by. And by the time I started with the hot flushes and the no periods, I was then menopausal. And then the next 3 years, I kind of battled along with my symptoms. Now, I felt compelled to do something about this. And yet I've met women who have suffered much worse than I did. So anyway, with all my experience, I just couldn't believe I was so blindsided. And I'd worked on the board of the Abbey Theatre. I was on the board of the Abbey Theatre for 6 years. And after about 6 weeks on the board, I ended up chairing their Gender Equality Committee, because the 2016 programme, which was the centenary programme, had one play in it by a woman, and that written by a woman, and that was touring schools. So there was a big backlash about that, and quite rightly so. So I ended up with a team, and we implemented policy change at the Abbey. So we introduced a gender equality policy, and we set targets and measured it and published the results in our annual review. And then we measured the results year on year. And there was a knock-on effect into the theatre community. So that gave me a sense of the power of change, I suppose, and the power of policy development. And so when I was going through my period of menopause, it wasn't until I saw treatment and just started to feel so much better that I kind of thought, wow, I want to wave a magic wand for the women in Ireland so that nobody has to go through what I did, but I can shortcut this journey for them. So why does menopause in the workplace matter? It matters because there's such a large cohort of the population will experience this. A large cohort are in the workplace. And if we care about talent retention and attraction, if we care about performance of women, if we care about health and safety of our employees, then we will look to support them through the various different stages of life. So I've been quoted as saying that menopause is like mental health was maybe about 10 years ago. And that was taboo and not spoken about. And now lots of organisations have policies, they have programs in place and so on. And I think the same should happen for menopause.
So I've tons of questions here, because I feel the exact same. Why is women's health not treated the same way as mental health? With all the EAP supports, with all the different workshops that are going on for mental health, resilience, you name it. So I'm curious about that. So I want to pull back a little bit, because I have tons of questions to ask if I'm honest. I'm 44, so I'm sure from my research that I've been doing, 42 years onwards is where that perimenopause can happen. So you were talking about you didn't see the signals there. You were blindsided. You were talking about MRI, dizzy spells, UTIs, the whole gamut of different symptoms and stuff that you didn't go into. And I'm curious then, if I have someone my age, what are the things that we should be looking out for?
Well, how I liken menopause is like puberty in reverse. Yeah. So what I mean by that is that when a girl goes into puberty, her body is flooded with primarily estrogen, but not only estrogen. And estrogen is a hormone that actually either touches every cell in the body or has a conversation with every cell in the body, and it's responsible for all those changes. So menopause is seeing the exact opposite in terms of the decline in the hormones, primarily estrogen, but not only estrogen, which leads to lots of different symptoms. So if you can imagine, it's like the oil in the engine of a car. And I think it's a brilliant analogy because it's a lubricant and all of that. And that's what estrogen does. It keeps the body lubricated from the inside out. And what's actually happening is, if you can imagine the oil in your engine is in sort of, is going lower and lower and lower, and you're not, replacing it, the car can start to stutter and shudder and things start going wrong. And all of a sudden, eventually it'll stop and come to a halt. So it's really kind of like that, and it's that essential. But as I said, we prepare our children for puberty. We educate ourselves, we educate them. The school curriculum covers it. And no parent in the right mind would not be prepared for puberty. We give our children who go through puberty a lot of latitude for those moods, for those gruntings, for those, sleeping late, eating loads of food, my daughter crying, some anxiety, all different symptoms that affect them. Their body shape is changing. And I can remember saying on occasions, "Where's my baby gone?" It's a bit like that for women, in the sense that, their old self is kind of gone while all these changes are happening. So this can start happening from the early 40s. And so the average age of perimenopause is 45, and the average age of menopause is 51. And the average length of menopause between peri and post is actually 7.4 years. So it can go on for quite some time. So we have on our website a symptom checker, which actually has up to about 40 different symptoms. And they're divided into the ones that are called the sort of emotional, psychological, mental side. Then there's the physiological side, the physical side. And then there's the genitourinary. So I'll just explain a little bit about that. So the things you could be looking out for are things like memory loss, mood swings, anxiety, depression, panic attacks. You can start to feel flat in your mood, lack of confidence, that kind of thing. You can have brain fog. So there's a lot of things that can impact the woman in the workplace. On the physical side, there's things like insomnia is huge. I couldn't get over that. Either not being able to get to sleep, getting to sleep and waking up before in the morning, or having fits of broken sleep throughout the night. Then there's the hot sweats and the hot flushes, the night sweats. But you don't have to have those things. And maybe in your 40s you don't experience the hot flushes. Then you can have things like digestive issues. You can have, your hair starts to thin, or you lose your hair, headaches, migraines, feeling kind of bloated, irregular periods. There's a big long list of things. And dizziness, fatigue, etc. So there's a whole load of those physical sort of symptoms. And then there's the genitourinary, which can result in things like incontinence, UTI, so that comes from bladder issues, urinary tract infection. Then there's also sort of painful sex, vaginal dryness, and vaginal discharge. And they can make life difficult as well. So women can be experiencing some of these, all of these, if you're really unlucky, or some combination. And also they can come and go. So as the hormones are fluctuating in your 40s and so on, they can come and go. And I can remember when I started the hot flushes in particular, because I'd have like 20 to 30 a day, and I could be up making a presentation, and all of a sudden you get this surge of heat. And honestly, you'd kind of want to rip your clothes off. And I know, not a great image, but you really would. And I could even feel the hair, the sort of the moisture on the end of my hair follicles. And of course, I'd be thrown off track. I'd be embarrassed standing up in front of, board members, senior employers, that kind of thing. And, you can be put off your stride, but you have to kind of get on with it. Or I felt I had to get on with it. And the thing that often affects women in the workplace as well, in particular, is this kind of brain fog, this lack of being able to concentrate, attention to detail, and so on. And then layer on that any anxiety you might have, layer on top of that lack of sleep. And you can understand, if you think about the oil in the engine analogy, how things start to become more difficult. And women in this age group are often in what we call the sandwich generation. So they may have children or teenagers, they may have aging parents, they're working outside the home, they're running a home, etc., etc. And they were probably able to cope very well in their 30s with it all. And then in the 40s, some of these things become more difficult to cope with. And this is where women say to us on a regular basis, "I think I'm going mad," because they've got anxiety for the first time that they don't know where it's come from. Or anxiety can be triggered, or they go to the GP and they say, my mood is kind of flat. I'm not quite depressed, but my mood is low. As I said, this brain fog can affect you in the workplace. You can, lose your memory in the middle of a sentence, and so on and so on. There's sort of, if you feel as if you feel off, you feel different, you feel something's not right, you don't know quite what it is. Get a copy of our symptom checker, I can send it to you, and start to monitor and keep an eye on your symptoms. And you'll see, for some women, their periods change. They become less frequent, they become more frequent, they become lighter, they become heavier, and they can be signals as well in the 40s. But it's about kind of, I suppose, being forearmed. So being forewarned is forearmed, really. And by demystifying it, you actually take some of the fear out of it. And as I said, women have come to us in the past and said, I think I'm going mad. I think I'm getting early dementia. I think I'm getting, because joint ache and pain can be part of it as well, I think I'm getting rheumatoid arthritis. And women are, if your GP isn't informed about menopause, and there's some fantastic GPs out there, but if your GP isn't informed and you go, you'll be sent like I was, off to the eye and ear with the dry eye, the pains in the ankles, to the physio, for the brain scan, here's antibiotics for the UTI. And it's very easy to explain away all those things. Oh, I'm stressed, not sleeping enough, I've too much on my plate, I'm getting old. And there's a reason for everything. But what we need is someone to join those dots for us. And I couldn't, and my GP didn't. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to kind of short circuit this for women. So I would say 7 years of my life, the quality of my life could have been much better. And I would love to have known more then than I did. And therefore, if I could wave a magic wand, every woman in Ireland would know about menopause, and that they would know that they don't need to suffer in silence, and that there is help available. And as I said, if your teenager turned around and you had no idea about puberty and went from this lovely, cuddly little child to a cheeky, moody, slamming the doors, etc., rebelling, you'd be like, what's going on? So for the women, as I said, 80% don't know what's happening to them. And if they don't know what's happening, how can their partners possibly know, or their family members or whatever? Yeah. Do you know?
I'm a bit flabbergasted with all the various ways that women can be affected. So like panic attacks, brain fog, anxiety, insomnia, digestion, incontinence, embarrassment. You were talking about quality of life. Then obviously that's an impact on quality on work. So, and I'm sure a bit like puberty, it affects people in different ways. So I get that. And then I'm thinking, well, are women reluctant to speak about this? Like, it seems something intensely personal to speak to your manager about. And at the same time, they might be seen as a dilemma is, right, we don't want to be seen as weak because I want to get promoted, So I just like, there's that dilemma going on, isn't there?
100%. And I would liken it to a mental health scenario. It's the same thing. When I was working in the workplace, I was going through the worst of my menopause symptoms, primarily the hot flushes, I suppose, because they were very visible. And I didn't dare tell anyone this is what was going on. And there was a few reasons for that. One is, first of all, I was too embarrassed. B, they'd be too embarrassed. People would, I felt, kind of maybe ridicule. I also felt that people would say, oh, she's getting old. She's old and she's past it, and really, let's be moving her on type thing. Plus, I just didn't want to draw attention to myself. And I regret that now, because it would have been an opportunity for a conversation. But, I suppose Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're starting to have these conversations now, and organizations are reaching out, looking for help and support in this area, which I think is fantastic. It is an awkward conversation, but I think it's a kind of a push and pull scenario. If an employer is willing to open up about this and say, we want to talk about this, we want to support you, and it's not just lip service, because that can be the issue. At the same time, women will then feel slightly more confident to speak about it. you know? And so that's what I mean by kind of push and pull. And it's a journey. It won't happen, one day to the next. It will require training, it will require education, it will require women to have a positive experience when they do open up about it, to encourage others. It will require, time. So I think starting is the best thing we can do.
And you're talking about regret there. If you were to go back a number of years and give advice to yourself, what advice would that be to overcome those regrets?
Well, I think two things. One of them is I would have sought help earlier for what was going on, had I known what was going on. And one of the things I was terrified of is HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, which I have to say has had a very bad rap. There was a report out in 2002 called the Women's Health Initiative, and the headlines around the world were, HRT is dangerous. So women stopped asking for HRT overnight. Doctors stopped prescribing it overnight. So, of course, I had this in my head. I also had this thing of, strong women power through. Now, when I was going in to have my babies into the Coombe, I ran in and I said, when do I ask for the epidural? When do I ask for the epidural? So there was no sense of, not powering through the births. So if I look back, it would be to seek help, to be aware, to be educated, to seek help earlier, and to speak more openly about it amongst my friends, amongst my family, amongst my colleagues in work, and so on. And maybe, start to look for supports for others. So I think that's what I would do. But, little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and I knew nothing. So it was,
This is the whole reason we're talking about this now. And then there might be an argument from some people that might say, oh, we've gone a step too far here. There's no place in the workplace to talk about this stuff. This crack, keep it to yourselves.
Now, I just want to say you're absolutely right. And there is some people that can say that. And there's sort of two groups. So 80% of menopausal women, so between the age of 45 and 60, 70, whatever, will experience symptoms. 80% will experience symptoms. So that's enormous. About 50% of those will experience moderate to severe symptoms. 25% will experience severe debilitating symptoms. The data in the UK says that 25% of women will consider giving up work and 10% will actually give up work. Okay? So there's some stats, and I'm a big fan of statistics and data and research because, let's talk about it, but let's actually size the issue. So yes, if I'm a menopausal woman and I don't have symptoms, don't put me in that category, please. I'd be thinking, maybe. Or I may be a menopausal woman who just doesn't want to, participate in this. So therefore, I think that's every person's right. If they don't want support and they're not looking for support, they don't have to have support. They don't have to be labelled in that way. However, there are women who are saying that they need support. And I've just done some research that's live at the moment. I'm doing rather live about menopause in the workplace to understand what women in Ireland feel and need. And the numbers are phenomenal. 80% of women are saying that they want a policy in their workplace around this, that they feel that their work has been impacted negatively by their symptoms. So we're actually launching next week a program of work for organisations to support them through menopause in the workplace. So that can be awareness training for staff and colleagues, or for management and HR, some training workshops. They can be appointment of menopause champions in the workplace, which are people who are going to look out for this cause within the work. They can help, support and keep the conversation alive. They can bring in extra supports, but they can also broker those conversations that may be difficult between, say, an employee and their line manager. Because you imagine, a 51-year-old woman going up to her 37-year-old line manager and saying, I didn't have a great night's sleep last night because, and so you may not feel confident in that scenario, either side, and therefore maybe having a menopause champion to broker that would be good. We're also going to have some online resources, so they'd be, kind of video content that would be like seminars where people can do deep dives into menopause and mental health, menopause and sleep, menopause physiologically, and menopause and diet and lifestyle and exercise. And then we'll also have one on menopause and mental health. if I didn't say it already. And then finally, I suppose the key thing is, to develop a menopause in the workplace policy. That would be the ultimate, I think. But it depends on the phase of your organization. It depends on the makeup of your organization. If you don't have a lot of women, then you may not need that. If you don't have a lot of women in this age cohort, you may not need that. Or if, maybe your workforce aren't demanding this, but a lot of organizations are coming to us. And I have to say, great credit to Joe Duffy during the summer, because on his Liveline program, he covered menopause for 8 days in a row exclusively. And he lifted the lid on menopause. And so many women were relieved to know that was all that was wrong with them.
Mm. Wow. And so if I'm that 37-year-old manager, and I have a direct report that's 51 years of age, if I go to that training workshop, then what would I get from that training workshop?
Well, what you get is an understanding of why it's important for the workplace, because as we're talking about it, it's a health and safety issue. It's a duty of care to your employee. It could be a performance issue, and it's obviously a talent retention and attraction issue. And coming down the tracks in the UK will be a legislative issue. And as whatever happens in the UK will happen here. And there's been a number of tribunals in the UK that have been held, and they've ruled in favour of the menopausal woman on grounds of age discrimination, sex discrimination, and in a couple of cases, disability. Now, personally, I wouldn't like to be called, wouldn't like to have a disability because I'm menopausal. But in those scenarios, I think it was chronic menopausal symptoms over many years, and it was ruled in favour of disability. So, organisations should be really taking the carrot rather than the stick approach and doing what's right for their employees, rather than being fearfully backed into a corner, or legislation is coming down the tracks. But that is a risk. It's also a reputational risk to your employer brand. But to answer your question, if you're on in a workshop, you learn, why is menopause important? You learn what, top line, what menopause is and why it happens and how it can affect women. And then you'll be also taught to, things to look out for. And then you'll be taught how to have those conversations. There'll even be role play involved in trying to have that kind of a difficult conversation with an employee. And it's really around, understanding what reasonable adjustments that employee might need. Is it a cooler place to sit, aircon, or a window, or maybe an individual fan for your desk? Is it that you're wearing a uniform and the uniform material is just not conducive to hot flushes and so on, and therefore you might need a different material, a different shape, or you might need more pieces. If it's something like a rest area where you can go temporarily, or you might need to use the bathroom more frequently, women's periods become irregular and become very, very heavy with things called flooding. So I heard this woman on the Joe Duffy show, and she was a bus driver, and she talked about experiencing this flooding, and she had pads, and oh my God, she couldn't get off the bus to change because, the passengers were complaining, she'd no one to take over, etc. So, if you're on a production line, you may not be able to take the breaks that you need, whereas if you're office-based, you might be able to get up and go. And I think it becomes more important as we move back into the workplace after COVID. So people who've been at home have been able to provide their own reasonable adjustments, open the kitchen door, go out into the garden, breath of fresh air, whatever. Or, if you've slept badly for so many nights in a row, you might say, well, look, I'll start a little later tomorrow and finish later tomorrow evening. You may need medical appointments. You may need time off for that. And you may just want some support groups. Other people who are experiencing the same thing. So it's really about, I suppose, individualizing it to that individual. What do they need to help them be their best, deliver their best for the organization? And that's sensitive, and that's can be a difficult conversation. But once again, if you're educated in any way, lots of people will be sniggering at menopausal women, and there's all sorts of jokes and all this kind of thing. But the reality of it is that if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, trust me, it's not that pleasant. So it's about being sensitive about how you handle it and being, I suppose, educated to handle it in the right way and make it okay for the employee to feel that they may need these temporary adjustments.
And I think you make a lot of valid points there. A lot of it is to do with reputation, organizational reputation, and there's a war on for talent now. So there's
Big
a
time.
great resignation going on. So this can be a talent retention tool or talent attraction. And again, with regard to trends from working from home and the hybrid working place, then it is all about individualizing there. So it's really about, putting that in the conversation about menopause as part of flexible or remote working or whatever the workarounds there to meet individual needs.
And can I just say one other thing, sorry, which is, the important role that women play in terms of, what skills and their different perspectives that they bring to the party. So we're all, trying to, allow women to take more senior roles in organizations, senior roles on boards and so on, and be leaders and visible in the organization. And this is a time, like a peak period for this. Do you know what I mean? Where women are, their kind of seniority is culminating. And organizations will have invested a lot of time at training, development, money into these employees. So the last thing you want them to do is to be leaving because they just, can't deliver the work to the standard they'd like. And that would be a sad loss for an organization, and it's sort of anti what we're trying to do around gender and diversity and inclusion, to be honest.
That was a conversation I'm very much passionate about that I had last week with someone, is all the gains that we have in the last couple of years with gender balance could be completely wiped out without, adding these supports then. And I'm thinking about that if we lose people in that sanguine generation who are menopausal, what will happen all that those women in senior leadership positions is we lose that diversity. And then what happens to the organization? We lose innovation, we lose that different perspective, it impacts on
profitability, everything.
So I think this is a really important conversation. And with that in mind, then we talk about the policies then. Do you see it as something that, like an EAP support? I'm thinking like mental health 10 years ago. So I worked in that area a number of years ago, and companies were poorly equipped to have any conversations. And now it's kind of rolled out by insurance providers or EAP as part of their plan. Do you see it evolving in that way, or do you see it as maybe bespoke? How do you see policies being implemented then?
I think there are a number of things that you can do for the organization. Some of the things we talked about and the sort of top tips for that. I think the EAP should ultimately be a part of that. And I think women would appreciate that, as would employers. The biggest problem, I think, at the moment is that there's very few people skilled in the area of menopause in Ireland, from a medical perspective, a psychological perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So actually, our business could be, quadruple the size tomorrow if I could get doctors. That's my biggest barrier to growth. Doctors and nurses is my biggest barrier to growth. But yes, and I know that the likes of the insurance providers are looking to see how they can resource up in this particular area. Organizations are looking to see how they can get sort of EAP support for their staff and so on. So yes, I do think that and that can be a challenge, 100%. But yeah, the policy, you can get an off-the-shelf policy that our organisation can provide, or you can get a very bespoke one depending on the size of your organisation. So yeah, and there could be multiple layers. But at the same time, you could argue, let's look at things through the lens of menopause. What do we need to do to our health and safety? What do we need to do to our OT? What do we need to do to our sickness policy, our absence policy? Do you know what I mean? And you can tweak those, and you don't need to have full necessary policy if you don't want to. But I think it's about knowing where the changes need to be made.
So if I was a woman listening in here, and I'm either going for promotion or I'm in a senior leadership position, and I'm really reevaluating where I'm at now. I was in my safety zone from working from home at the moment. I got my own workarounds there. I was relieved about that. What advice would you give to people returning to work now, especially if they're going through menopause now? Because you might have been premenopausal before pre-COVID, and now you're in the middle of it now, and you're like, oh, you're panicking. What do I do now? What are the resources available to women then if they're either going for promotion or a senior leadership position? Because I'm thinking I'm having a panic attack about going back in, and my confidence is affected. And then you talk about brain fog and all the other stuff that I'm talking about. So what advice you give to women there?
I think, it takes great courage, to be honest, to go and to talk about this. So, ideally speaking, you'll be able to go to HR and say, what policies do we have in terms of supporting women in menopause? Maybe you speak to others who are in the same sort of age group as you, and you go as a group to HR to find out what's going on. It depends on the relationship you have with your line manager and so on. But obviously power in numbers. But I do think it's a difficult situation to broach, and it requires a lot of confidence and courage. The alternative is to muddle through, I think. And I don't know if that's a good enough answer, because it's like we're tackling this new taboo, and it's going to be hardest for those who take the brave step. In 10 years' time, this will be a much easier conversation. And I guess it's the question of, how comfortable do you feel? How confident do you feel? Can you do something to get your HR department to consider this seriously, your OT, and are there others in the organisation so you're not on your own with this matter, that it affects a number of women? That's my approach. The other thing, actually, while I think of it, is it would be good to go and say, this will be something that I think will benefit the women in our organisation. Look at the makeup of our organisation. Why don't we have some menopause awareness training or menopause awareness seminars? I believe men need to be involved in this as well. And when I was on the Gender Equality Committee for the Abbey, it was very interesting to see how, women were pushing this agenda. But men who had daughters were very interested in the progress of gender equality, I noticed. And I think men who have wives or partners or sisters or whatever, that might also be kind of a leverageable hook, if you like. But it will be difficult, and it will be brave, and it may be a risk worth taking, or it may not. So I think it's up to the individual to judge. I couldn't, blanket say, I do this, because I wouldn't have done it 7 years ago.
If I was a male manager here and I'm avoidant of this and I don't want to know, and I'm like, you know what, let the women handle it, in the organisation, what would you say to a male manager there that might be reluctant to talk about it or to explore more?
I actually think it's a skill. I think it would be a leadership quality. And if you can't have difficult conversations with your staff, then what type of a manager are you? So I would actually think for self-development, it would be within your best interests to embrace these variety of different things that are happening to your staff, whether it's menopause, whether it's a fertility issue, whether it's cancer, maybe it's prostate cancer, maybe it's a male, maybe it's mental health issues, maybe it's a miscarriage, it can be a family crisis, it can be anything. And I think in order to be a great manager and a great leader, you need to be prepared for these conversations, you need to be prepared to have them. And I think it's a test of your mettle, actually.
That is a
because
great
if you avoid them,
response.
Yeah.
It
won't develop.
And it is another dimension to diversity and inclusion, talent and engagement. And this is a great conversation that we're having today. So I know you are releasing your research. We have World Menopause Day on October 18th.
Who would have thought there's a World Menopause Day? Yes.
I know. And thank you for informing me and our listeners about that. So we're coming to the end of our podcast today, Loretta. This has been so insightful for me. If I'm honest, I'm a bit taken aback by all the various different things. I know through a little bit of the research that I'm doing that it impacts in so many different ways there. I was even looking at how the hormones are affected. We mentioned estrogen, but then there's progesterone and androgens
Testosterone.
and
Yeah.
cortisone and insulin for energy and, ghrelins for hunger and the ones for body fat and all of these different things. And I'm like, oh my, it's a bit like this. This is why we need the training, isn't it? Because there's so much from nutrition, mental health, emotional, there's coaching supports, but then it's that specialized support really is what's missing, isn't it?
It is, and that's why we have a multidisciplinary team, really, to be honest, because we have people who work on the psychology, so CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, can be really good. Women who have got pelvic floor issues may need help with that. Women who have weight problems, we've got a dietitian and nutritionist. Then we have the doctors, we have gynecologists and GPs, and we're an evidence-based clinic. So we work on with stuff that we know works. And I guess the biggest breakthrough for me personally was that I got my information, and I like to consider myself to be a good decision maker. And so I got my information together. I looked at the risks and benefits, and the benefits outweighed the risks for me to go on hormone replacement therapy. So I'm on 3 hormones. I'm on, and it's delivered through my skin, through, it could be gels, patches, or creams. So I'm on estrogen, I'm on a progestogen. So it's like your progesterone, because I have a womb. If you don't have a womb, you don't need that. You just need estrogen. And I'm also on testosterone, which I didn't even know women needed. Now, not every woman needs it, but I needed it. And my ability to function, I literally, once I'd got onto these hormones, I got my va-va-voom back. I got my focus, my energy, my vitality. People start to say to me, God, you look great, Loretta. I didn't realize it was to do with the HRT. I thought it was to do with the new skincare cream I was using and a new place I went for my eyebrows and who knows what, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But actually, I would never have been able to set up this business and this clinic and be an advocate for women because I wouldn't have had the energy to do that or the motivation or anything. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom because I feel this is the third act. And one of the other hormones that's really important is called oxytocin. And it's what women have floating through their bodies that makes them very kind of, wanting to care for people. And that starts to decline too. So, my children are kiddos now, thankfully. And so I'm embracing this next phase of my life because I'm going to be postmenopausal for the next, 20, 30 years. And to be honest with you, I've got a bags of experience. I've got, skills. I've got some talent. And I feel I have a lot more to give to the world.
I am so curious. I have to ask you a question. I know I keep asking you more questions. You mentioned oxytocin, then you mentioned testosterone.
Don't ask me my age now.
I definitely will not do. My mother warned me never to do that. I got the wooden spoon for that one day, I think. Maybe, ma'am, I'm sorry for revealing that. So testosterone. Maybe I should edit that one out. Why do women need testosterone? So we talk about estrogen and
Yeah, and progesterone. And well, the reason is that, we do have testosterone in our bodies, not obviously the strength of men's, but some women, their testosterone declines as well. And therefore, or it doesn't convert as well in the body from other things. So therefore, it can help with loss of libido. It can help with sort of energy, focus, and that kind of... I call it my joie de vivre, my va-va-voom or whatever, Okay. Now, some other women come here and they don't need it, their levels, because, once you start on it, you have to have your testosterone levels measured after 6 weeks and then twice a year after that to make sure that you're not overdosing, because it is, a male hormone, but it's titrated down for women or there's some female-only versions available. But the thing is that that was one of the hormones that I badly needed. To be honest, had I kept going in the way of going, I would never have known about that. And I describe myself as like a slow puncture.
Yeah.
And the energy was only going one way. And I just couldn't see an end in sight, to be honest. It was relentless. Now, and I would consider my menopause to be average.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by this. So there's another thing came into my head there. So you're talking about, I suppose, being the sandwich generation. We're looking after our kids. We're looking after our parents. We have a full-time job. It seems to me that there's a lot of time out for this maintenance of your own health. So you're talking about getting your testosterone levels taken, and all this like, how do we accommodate for that time within our weeks? Like, is there an onus on employers to allow us that time, or is that, okay, you do that in your own time, What?
Well, I would say as part of your reasonable adjustments, it should be down to kind of each woman. And if a woman needs to go, maybe she needs to go to a gynecologist, needs a hysterectomy, these things can happen, So it would be the same sort of thing, what reasonable adjustments do you need? Like, so I'm on my treatment option that's optimum for me. And therefore, all I need now to do is to go to my menopause specialist twice a year. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
So, that's all. Now, how many times was I going in my perimenopause to the doctor, to the MRI scan, to the this, to the that, to whatever? Do you know what I mean? Now I'm in, what would you say, in my maintenance mode. And the reality is that, once I'm under medical supervision, I get checked out twice a year, and unless something major changes, that'll be me for a while.
So it's very much a focused approach because you're getting those specialist interventions. And you mentioned so much about your evidence-based approach, which is wonderful to hear. And the amount of statistics you have is truly impressive. So I might congratulate you on that, Loretta. Thank you so much. And if people were to find out more about your research and the Menopause Clinic and we're Menopause Day on October 18th, how might they do so, Loretta?
So if you go to our website, which is themenopausehub.ie, you'll find out about all the services that we offer. We have our own conference coming up on the 16th of October, which is open to the public. The tickets are €10, but the proceeds are going to Saoirse Refuge, Women's Refuge. So it's women helping women. And we have some amazing international speakers at that. So that's one thing. But you can find that. Our symptom checker is there. There's lots of different information. So the menopausehub.ie is really there. There's also a number of other international websites that you can go to. So there's the Women's Health Concern, which is the consumer arm of the British Menopause Society. They have a lot of helpful information there as well. And there's a woman, she's become a great friend of mine, but she's a medical doctor from the US, and she has over 300, I think now, videos on YouTube about menopause. Her name is Barbara Taylor MD, or Menopause Taylor. She has over 300 videos about menopause, and her role in life is to be an educator. So I learned a hell of a lot from her, I can tell you, in my research and setting up. But I'm a big believer in sort of data, in trying to quantify the issue, and then trying to solve the problem if I can, in whatever. But this is a journey. And as I said, it won't happen kind of overnight. But people like you, inviting people like me onto this is absolutely fantastic. I really, really appreciate the offer and the platform. I really do.
Loretta, it is my pleasure to help you smash the taboo of menopause in the workplace. Thank you so much for coming on to the Workplace Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Workplace Podcast. My special thanks to this week's guest for a wonderful discussion. If you want to get in contact with the podcast about a workplace topic or a particular challenge that you're facing, contact me via Twitter at Different Paths. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, William Corless, Corless, or go to my website, www.yellowwood.ie. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Provider executive coaching, facilitation and training. Take a different path to success with your career, leadership, team and organisation.